In 465 BCE, a woman was dragged into the courtyard of the most magnificent palace on earth. What happened next was so brutal that even the hardened soldiers who witnessed it couldn't speak of it without trembling. Her crime? Saying no to the wrong man. But here's what makes this story truly horrifying. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was just one day in the Persian royal court, one crime in a decades-long pattern that turned the world's most beautiful palace into a chamber of psychological torture. And the man responsible, you know his name, you've seen his armies in movies, but you have no idea what he really was. History wants you to remember King Xerxes I of Persia as a warrior, as the man who led millions against Greece, as the builder of monuments that defied imagination. That's the story we tell ourselves because it's easier to digest. But what if I told you that behind those golden walls, a different war was being fought? One without swords or shields. One where the victims couldn't run, couldn't fight back, and couldn't even speak their truth without risking everything they loved. What if the greatest atrocity of Xerxes' reign had nothing to do with Greece? What if it was happening right under his own roof every single day to the people who should have been safest in his presence? Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about ancient Persia. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this story was buried for over 2,000 years. Let's start with a question that historians rarely ask. What does it actually do to a human being when everyone around them insists they're not human at all? October 486 BCE, the throne room of Persepolis. A 36-year-old man named Xerxes receives the crown of the largest empire the world has ever seen. His father, Darius the Great, is dead. And from this moment forward, Xerxes will never again experience a single genuine human interaction. Think about that for a second. Every person who approaches him must follow an elaborate ritual called proskynesis, falling face down on the ground, kissing the earth before him, not bowing, not kneeling, completely prostrating themselves as if before a deity. No one can turn their back to him, ever. To do so is death. No one can look directly into his eyes unless given explicit permission. No one can speak unless spoken to first. The Greek historian Herodotus recorded something chilling about Persian court protocol. If you had to approach the king with urgent news, you first had to stand outside the throne room for days, sometimes weeks, waiting for permission to enter. Even if the empire was burning, even if cities were falling, you waited, because disturbing the god king at the wrong moment could cost you your head. But here's what makes this truly insidious. Xerxes wasn't born believing he was divine. He was systematically conditioned into it. His mother, Atossa, understood power better than anyone alive. She was the daughter of Cyrus the Great, the empire's founder. She'd watched her own family tear itself apart in succession wars. She'd seen brothers poison brothers, seen entire bloodlines erased overnight. And she knew the brutal truth. In the Persian court, family wasn't a source of love. It was the most dangerous threat of all. So she taught her son a lesson that would poison everything he touched. Trust nothing, control everything, show no weakness. Because the moment you're seen as human, the moment you're seen as vulnerable, you're already dead. The Greek sources tell us Atossa had enormous influence over Xerxes, more than any father figure or advisor. And what she created wasn't a king. She created something far more dangerous. A man who genuinely believed that other human beings existed only as extensions of his will. Now let's talk about the place where this all unfolded, the royal household itself. Hollywood gets this spectacularly wrong. When we picture ancient Persian kings, we imagine some kind of eternal bachelor party, hundreds of wives, endless pleasure, a fantasy of absolute indulgence. But the reality was far more complex and, in some ways, far more disturbing. The Persian royal household, called the Anderun, was actually a sophisticated political institution. And contrary to popular belief, Xerxes appears to have been married to only one woman throughout his entire adult life, Queen Amestris. Think about the implications of that. This wasn't a harem of disposable women who could be ignored. Amestris was a permanent fixture, a woman of immense power in her own right. She owned vast estates, she commanded her own household troops, she held audiences with foreign dignitaries. Ancient records show she even controlled major construction projects across the empire. But here's the catch that makes this entire system so psychologically twisted. All of that power existed at Xerxes' pleasure. With a single word, he could strip it all away. The royal household was home to the most powerful women in the empire: the king's mother, his wife, his sisters, his daughters, and the wives and daughters of his closest relatives. These women lived in unimaginable luxury. They wore robes worth more than entire cities. They dined on delicacies brought from every corner of the known world. They were attended by hundreds of servants who existed solely to fulfill their wishes. But they were also prisoners. The Greek physician Xerxes, who served at the Persian court decades after Xerxes' death, left us descriptions of the royal household that sound like something from a nightmare. The women's quarters were sealed off from the outside world by massive walls and locked gates. Male visitors were forbidden entirely, except for the king himself and a small number of eunuchs who'd been castrated specifically to serve in the Anderun. The women could look out from high windows at the city below, but they couldn't leave. They could hear the sounds of life beyond the walls, but they couldn't participate in it. They had everything except the one thing that matters most: agency over their own existence. And here's what makes this even more horrifying. This wasn't seen as oppression. This was seen as honor, as protection, as the highest privilege a woman could achieve. The women themselves had been raised from birth to see this cage as a palace, to see their powerlessness as power, to see their isolation as intimacy with divinity itself. This is what makes systemic control so insidious. The victims internalize it. They defend it. They can't even imagine an alternative. For decades, this system functioned exactly as designed. The official Persian records, carved into stone monuments across the empire, speak only of order, prosperity, and divine harmony. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. And then something went catastrophically wrong. Here's where Herodotus enters the story. Writing about 30 years after Xerxes' death, he recorded an incident so disturbing that scholars have debated its authenticity for over 2 millennia. And I want to be clear with you, Herodotus was Greek, writing for a Greek audience who had every reason to hate Persia. His account could be propaganda, it could be exaggeration, it could even be complete fiction, but the details he provides are so specific, so psychologically precise, that they deserve our attention. According to Herodotus, sometime in the late 400s and 70s BCE, after the disastrous Greek campaign, after Xerxes had returned to Persia in humiliation, the king developed an obsession with the wife of his own brother, Mistress. This woman's name isn't even recorded. History didn't bother to preserve it. Let's call her what she was, a victim. She was married to one of the king's most powerful military commanders, a man who commanded armies and governed entire provinces. She was a mother. She was, by all accounts, living a relatively normal life within the constraints of royal culture. And Xerxes wanted her. Now this is where the story gets psychologically revealing, because Xerxes didn't just take what he wanted. Remember, he believed he was divine. He believed that everything and everyone existed for his pleasure. But even with all that conditioning, some part of him apparently still sought consent, still wanted to be desired, not just obeyed. So he approached her, made advances, made promises, and she said no. Think about the courage that took. This was the most powerful man on earth, who had absolute legal authority to take anything he wanted, who had executed people for far less than refusing him, and she looked him in the eye and said no. For most men, that would have been the end of it. Even for most tyrants, there would have been consequences, but the matter would have ended there. But Xerxes wasn't most tyrants. His conditioning had taught him that his desires were cosmic imperatives. That resistance to his will was a form of disorder in the universe itself, something that needed to be corrected, so he didn't give up. He simply shifted his focus to her daughter. Artante was probably in her late teens or early 20s. She was Xerxes' own niece, and unlike her mother, she apparently didn't have the strength, or perhaps the awareness, to refuse. The affair began, and here's where it gets even more twisted. Xerxes, who'd been rejected by the mother, now had complete control over the daughter, and some part of him needed to prove that control, to demonstrate his power in a way that would hurt the woman who dared to refuse him. According to Herodotus, Xerxes promised Artante anything she wanted,